My name is Katie Glenn. My pronouns are she and her. I work for the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery. I've been there almost 3 years, and I'm on the Union Bargaining Committee.
My name is Lisa Wright. I work for Southern Poverty Law Center. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I've been there for about 21 years. I work in the Montgomery office, and I am a member of the original organizing committee. I'm also a steward, and I'm also on the negotiating team.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Working People, a podcast about the lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles of the working class today. Brought to you in partnership with In These Times magazine and the Real News Network, produced by Jules Taylor, and made possible by the support of listeners like you. So as y'all heard, we've got Katie and Lisa on the line today from the Southern Poverty Law Center to talk about an important and breaking story. We are possibly going to push back our regularly scheduled episode this week to make room for this important mini cast and a potentially other mini cast that we've got coming a little later in the week. So just a heads up there, we'll still bring y'all great working people content, but our next installment of our series focusing on teachers and organizers in Wisconsin may be pushed back by a couple days. So we wanted to bring Katie and Lisa on to talk about what's going on at the Southern Poverty Law Center right now. As y'all may recall, the Southern Poverty Law Center was in the news fairly recently, I guess, in our neck of the news, right, when they successfully voted to unionize. And this is what it says on the SPLC Union website. Quote, "Staff at the Southern Poverty Law Center, a historic civil rights organization advancing social justice through legal, educational, and advocacy efforts primarily in the Deep South, are unionized. A supermajority of employees spanning SPLC's 11 offices across 5 states and Washington, D.C., filed a union election petition on November 7th, 2019, with the National Labor Relations Board requesting representation by the Washington-Baltimore News Guild Local 32035 of the News Guild Communications Workers of America, AFL-CIO. The NLRB tallied the mail-in ballots on December 16th, 2019, certifying that SPLC employees voted overwhelmingly, I might add, 142 to 45 in favor of union representation. So that, end quote. So that was in 2019. The SPLC Union is still in the process of trying to negotiate its first contract with the Southern Poverty Law Center. This will sound very familiar to everyone listening because just last week we spoke to a non-tenured track faculty at the historic Howard University who had been fighting for almost 4 years to get their first contract. So we're seeing a really disgusting pattern here. But what we wanted to, talk to Katie and Lisa about today is an important action that took place on the day that we're recording this. So that's Monday, March 28th. And per a press release that was put out by the union, this is what it said. Quote, "Montgomery, Alabama. Today, from 12 to 12:45 p.m. Central Time, members of the SPLC Union will hold an informational picket outside of the Southern Poverty Law Center's headquarters building in downtown Montgomery to protest management's forcing mostly Black women employees to return to the office while allowing the option of remote work for white and higher paid employees. Black women, many of whom have been working at this organization for decades in positions with little or no opportunities for advancement, are 4 times more likely to be denied telework and or remote work than white women and are 7 times more likely to be denied telework options than white men at the center." End quote. So that's what we're here to discuss. And Katie and Lisa, I wanted to toss things over to you and ask if you could walk us through this. I think like maybe by way of getting us to the action today, it may be helpful to sort of give listeners some context here and maybe talk about what y'all and your coworkers have been going through at the Southern Poverty Law Center since overwhelmingly, along with your coworkers, voted to unionize.
Thank you, Max. So it has been quite the journey with this organization. We unionize. Our organization initially refused to voluntarily recognize our union, forced us into a vote. We won with an overwhelming majority, like you mentioned earlier. Yet this organization is still in that mindset that only a small subset of us are interested in this union and our goals and our values of our union. That being said, we started negotiating our contract with SPLC in November of 2020. It has now been over a year. I think we're pushing, 14, 15 months now? And we are still dealing with management dragging out this process. They have accused our unit of not wanting to work. In so many words that we're lazy because we are asking for leave and asking for these positions to be backfilled so we can actually take said leave. Just stalling tactic after stalling tactic. And it has been, they have made this process a whole lot more difficult than it has to be.
Yeah, I think Lisa really covered all of it. I started at the center in April of 2019. I think maybe a week after Richard Cohen, Morris Dees, and Rhonda Brownstein were all fired or quit, after 80 members 80 of our colleagues, we didn't have a union then, 80 of our colleagues sent a letter to the board demanding some radical change, right? And it has been a frustrating process. It's been a long process. I think the only thing that gets us through all of this is each other. We are, I always think we're close to getting there on our contract. I hope we're close to getting there on our contract because Lisa's been at this a lot longer than I am, and even I'm tired. But it is frustrating to see these times, like with this return to the office process, where management refuses to acknowledge that we are equal partners in this now. We are, we have to have a conversation about these types of organization-wide decisions now. It's not just one or two people at the top who get to make these decisions. That this is a new SPLC. Even though we're 2 years in, sometimes it still takes a while to convince people to act that way.
And just to make sure that listeners are kind of caught up, could you just say a little more about those kind of high level that shakeups that happened when you first started there, Katie?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the spring of 2019, some very courageous whistleblowers, some of whom still work at this organization, some of whom do not, raised serious concerns, starting with a member of management who raised serious concerns about the racist and sexist environment that was both allowed and perpetuated by people at the top of this organization. Many of those accusations that you saw in the media were specifically leveled at Morris Dees, who was then fired. He was the co-founder of the organization, at one time had been the president, but he was only one person. In fact, he wasn't really the one in charge by that point. Richard Cohen was the president of the organization. As I mentioned, Rhonda Brownstein was the legal director. And to create such a organization-wide toxic environment where Black women are belittled, are paid less than their white peers, are not valued, takes more than just one person, right? There's a lot of people who have to participate in and consent to that discrimination, either explicitly or implicitly, for that to continue on for as long as it did. SPLC is over 50 years old, so this is not a new problem. And frankly, in places like Montgomery, it was sort of an open secret, right? And so, like I said, a group of about 80 staff members got together and penned a beautiful letter to the board of directors demanding change. And that's really what started it all.
Oh yeah. And I obviously that kind of carries over into what we're talking about here, right? Like you said, it's not just one person, it is an organization that is built a certain way that impacts people differently, which is very much what today's informational picket was trying to highlight. So I guess, like, by way of getting us there, I was wondering if we could talk a bit about that day to day, week to week work that y'all do at SPLC, and I guess, like, how and why that is divided the way that it is, to the point that at this moment some members of the workforce are being told to return to in-person work while others are allowed to continue working remotely. I guess, just for listeners who maybe don't know the kind of work that y'all do on a day-to-day basis, could we talk about that a bit, and how those levels are different for different people?
Essentially, the organization we have our learning and education section of the organization. That's a Learning for Justice. We have our law firm arm of the organization. That's our legal department that has attorneys and paralegals. We have our communications area. They handle all of our communications, social media, news, those kinds of things. Also have our administrative arms of our organization that handle our tech, financing, that kind of stuff. And then we have development. They're in charge of marketing and donor outreach and raising funds. And then you have the department I'm a part of, the donor services department, that take in all the revenue and make sure everything is accounted for, and all of those operations and all those different sectors can have what they need to do the work that they need to make our mission whole. And how those things are completely different but also similar is, we're in the 21st century. We don't have to all be in a little hut or in a little building to do these tasks anymore. Technology has come a long way. Yet and still, this organization, all the other departments have advanced and moved forward, but this organization is still holding on to one of the oldest departments in the organization, the Donor Services Department, that has been around since the very beginning. The organization is a little over 50 years old. One of my team members has been with the organization for 40 years. So literally, you're still trying to do this work like you did it 50 years ago. So the whole organization has moved forward, yet you're holding this department behind. And it makes absolutely no sense, because the same databases that our development and marketing teams are using, my team is using. And it's all remote. It's all based on internet and Wi-Fi. So why are we mandated back in the building? And the only thing it boils down to is surveillance and the policing of Black and brown bodies, especially women.
Yeah, Lisa, of course, is absolutely right. We have looked at the numbers. We've looked at who has been approved for either telework, so having to be in the office a few days a week, being able to be at home a few days a week, who was approved for remote work, either here in our states where we do the work, or at far distances. And there are just some glaring disparities. Black women at SPLC, and I think you may have read this at the top, Max, but I think it's worth reiterating. Black women are 4 times more likely to be denied telework and or remote work than white women. I am a white woman. For those of you in Podcast Universe who can't see me, I get to do my work from home. Lisa is a Black woman. She has to do her work from the office 5 days a week. In addition, Black women are 7 times more likely to be denied these same opportunities than white men. And these types of disparities cannot be just circumstantial, right? It's because SPLC has chosen to surveil and police the people in the lower paid positions at this organization, many of whom are Black women who have been locked into these positions for years without opportunities for advancement, because they don't trust them to do their work. I mean, that's just what it boils down to. If you trust people to do their work, you can provide the type of flexibility that allows people to do that work in the way that is best for them, best for the work, and best for their families. SPLC had a real chance to be a 21st century organization. I'm sure you know this. Lots of nonprofits are moving to a fully remote workforce, right? And that's not what we're asking. We know some people want to be in the office. We know some people prefer the routine of going to their desk every day. Some people either work better from home, have family members who are immunocompromised, have unvaccinated children, have a lot of reasons why they should remain at home, but only some of us are given that opportunity.
And to also add on to that, Max, there are additional layers to the disparity. Even how the designations and who was awarded what designations. So management has broken our remote and telework out into 3 categories. A distant remote, which means you can move anywhere around the country, and management will cover all of your expenses if you have to come to the office. There's also a local remote designation. This designation has been awarded to pretty much the whole legal department, the whole comms department, some members of finance, and that designation is different from the distant remote because in that the employees are responsible for their expenses if they have to come into the office, and they can move anywhere they want to. At least that's what management said in the beginning. They're trying to change course now, but the employee is responsible for their expenses. And then there's a telework designation, which has been awarded, oddly enough, to women of color. And that telework designation is they have to come into the office 3 days a week, 2 days where they get to work remotely. But as a last minute game changer, Margaret said, "Oh, you have to be here Tuesday and Wednesday." We're still in the middle of a pandemic. I thought we were trying to reduce the number of people in the building at one time. So we have 3 layers. So that first distant remote layer I mentioned, guess who's been awarded that level? All executives, all make 6 figures. And the company is paying for their expenses. Let me back that up. The donors are paying for their expenses. And you move down to the next level, local remote, all line staff, attorneys, people in comms, but they're responsible for their expenses. Have you seen the gas prices recently? They're insane. Yet this organization is holding all the line staff responsible for all their travel, and they can move wherever they want, but they want them to fly in at a minute's notice with gas prices and allied prices through the roof. And then the telework designation you have for women and women of color. And that designation has the least flexibility and restrictive. And then you have the other designation. You just come to work and we just watch you every day. So there are these different levels. And if you notice what I'm saying, the ones that have the most resources spend the least. Matter of fact, they spend the most of the donor money that comes into the organization, which they say they're so concerned about. At the bottom of the pool, the lowest paid workers incur the most expenses. They're already underpaid, but the organization is costing them even more money because now I have to get up, drive my car to this organization with the high gas prices, or I'm gonna force an employee from across the country to come into the office, fly into the state, and come into the office. For what? The disparity goes on and on. It's not just racial or gender roles. We're also talking about paternalistic. We're talking about, classism. The disparities go on and on and on. They're endless.
Well, and the elephant in the room, which I guess we've pointed to already, right? And this is not something that you have at every workplace, right? Some jobs are just jobs. I mean, most jobs are just jobs, right? But there still are jobs that take place at organizations or institutions that have a sort of ostensibly noble mission, right? That there's more tied into the job than just the work itself, right? And y'all mentioned the Southern Poverty Law Center has been doing really important social justice work for many years. It's got to be, I imagine, kind of impossible to ignore that, or at least feel some sort of attachment to that. And, again, last week I was talking to folks at Howard University, and we talked about how, if you work in higher education anywhere, there is a commitment to that mission of higher education, that love of teaching and so on and so forth. But especially, right, if you're at, the most storied HBCU in the country, founded after the Civil War, like you can't help but also have that commitment to the mission of the place that you're working at. And it's times like these when that disconnect between how workers at these organizations are being treated, and the disparity between how they're being treated and the mission that the organization serves is so stark that I would think from an organizational standpoint, they'd be like, shit, if people find out that we're doing this, they're going to lose faith in our ability to carry out that mission. So I guess I just wanted to ask for you all as workers at the SPLC, how you deal with that kind of divide between the mission that you're serving, the ideal of the SPLC, and everything that we're talking about here.
How do we deal with it, Lisa?
We unionize. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. We can no longer be at the whim of our organizations, right? They're all conflicted. Like, we're talking to other unionized bodies and other nonprofits, just like our organization, and we all have the same thing in common: the hypocrisy. Like, it's maddening, right? We as workers are committed to the mission, to our communities, to this work, and to have to over and over again try to get management in alignment with that mission and that dedication. It is maddening, right? And even more so, trying to get them to understand those same ideals also reflect in how you treat your employees, right? And literally, this has been a battle even before we unionize, and it's a more contentious battle right now, because it's like power. They don't want to give up any power. Like, they still don't want any accountability, no power sharing, and that's not why we're here. We want a more democratic process. We want a voice in this organization. We want to do the work that you say we're doing here, right? And so that has always been a challenge. And how do we deal with that? We keep pushing as a solidarity unit and as a union. We keep pushing because we're all here to do the work. We're all here to do the complete the mission, and all to be here for a community.
And I guess, speaking of that, can you tell us a bit about the action that took place today, and I suppose what that community response has been to learning about what we're talking about here?
So our action today was around the return to work, right? So this organization that's worth over $600 million, has over $600 million endowment, is saying they need their Black and brown bodies in the building. It doesn't make sense. So the lowest paid positions, predominantly women and women of color, were mandated back in the building. It's unfair. It's wrong. It's against our union values. And that is why we took our action today.
Going back to what you had asked Max about the hypocrisy of these organizations like ours, SPLC has over a $500 million endowment. That is more than most. Yeah. Oh, Lisa says it's over 600 million now. Lisa would know. That is more than most colleges and universities. I used to work in higher ed. Our endowment was nowhere near that high. That is the type of money that sort of the big and long-standing colleges have, right? And so this is not a question of whether or not SPLC has the money to do what we've been asking in our very reasonable proposals. But when an organization talks about its mission being focused on eradicating white supremacy, but it's unwilling to acknowledge the racial disparities inherent in its own policies, when it talks about how it's focused on eradicating poverty in the South, and we're paying people who have been here for decades less than I made when I walked in the door at this organization. And the main difference is that I'm a white woman and the person that I'm thinking of is a Black woman, right? It really is hard to match that up, right? With like who we say we are externally and who we are internally, which is why today, under Lisa's leadership, because this was all really Lisa's baby and wouldn't have happened without her, we decided that we need to tell folks that this is just unacceptable. We are not living in a February 2020 world any longer. It is time for nonprofits like ours to realize that we can and should do things differently, and to be accountable both to the communities that we serve, right? And also to the people who do this work every day.
Well, and I know that, y'all got more important work to do, and I don't want to keep you for longer than I have to, but I just wanted to thank you both so much for sitting down and chatting with me on the very day that you organized this informational picket. So we'll do our best on this end to help spread the word. And I guess I just wanted to ask, by way of rounding out, what folks out there listening can do to show you all and your coworkers in the union support.
So if people want to support us, want to support our union, I will say follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, find us on the social medias. We haven't gotten super far into TikTok, but we've tried it a little bit. If you're a donor to SPLC, call the organization, tell them this is unacceptable, tell them you expect better of a nonprofit that's fighting for racial justice in the South, and that you demand more. If you're not a donor, that is totally cool. You can still call the organization and tell them you expect better, right? If you are someone who works somewhere that is one of our partners in our organizational work, in our litigation work, in our advocacy work, you have the power to demand more of your partners. Tell SPLC it should be a better place, and help get our story out there. We have shared a whole lot of content today online on our social platforms about why we're here and why we're doing what we're doing, with the express goal of continuing to build power amongst our unit and get the word out there in order to convince management to do the right thing. And every time you speak out about this or share one of our posts or what have you, you help with that too. And then the last thing that other people can do is organize your own workplace, talk to your colleagues, be part of this movement with us, and join in on the fun.